Hi, and welcome back to Mr. Raymond's AP Government series, where today we will look at political ideologies and their impact on governmental policy to cover everything you will need to know for your AP Government exam. So first off, let's define political ideology, and most of you probably familiar with a lot of the material we're going to cover. But a political ideology is just a set of ideals, beliefs, and principles about how the government should operate and focus their attention. In other words, what is the role of the government? Whichever political ideology an individual aligns with usually impacts which political party they will identify with, aka party identification. And the driving factors are something that we covered in our lesson on political socialization in a previous lesson. So it's probably no surprise to you that Democrats often align with the liberal ideology and Republicans with conservatism. Conservatives traditionally believe that the government should not play a major role in the economy, a topic that we will look at closer in a minute, and conservatives tend to be more tied to traditional values, whereas liberals believe the government should play a larger role in the economy, however, less of a role in people's private lives. There is one ideology and political group that promotes the most extreme lack of governmental interference, both economically and personally, and those are the Libertarians. Now, we don't hear a lot about the Libertarians as much as we do the big two, but they help us balance the difference between the two when we're looking at them. Plus, they might show up on your AP exam. Libertarians want just a bare bones government, and while they tend to side more with the Republicans, they do favor some liberal ideas of increased privacy into personal behavior. Now, our caveat for this entire lesson is that none of these ideologies are absolute to individuals who favor certain political parties. Political scientists and political operatives look for trends, and as much as we frown on quote-unquote stereotyping, there is a fair amount of it when we are discussing political ideologies and party identification. Remember, they're looking for trends. Keep in mind that not all conservatives or liberals or Republicans and Democrats blindly agree with all of the issues and policies we are about to outline for their individual groups. For instance, are there liberal Democrats who are strong believers in the Second Amendment's right to bear arms? Of course. Are there conservative Republicans who believe in the need for more green energy? Yes. However, for your exam, you just want to be able to look at the most likely political policies that are consistent with the two major parties and ideologies. So when we refer to the political spectrum, liberals are to the left of the center, and conservatives are to the right, with moderates in the middle. And this is the political spectrum that I grew up on. However, political scientists have found that the single left to right axis is too simplistic and have replaced it with a variety of various models, such as the political compass, to denote the differences in social and economic beliefs of both conservatives and liberals. As hyper-partisan as the U.S. has been recently, pollsters still classify most individuals near the moderate center, despite often being drowned out by the extreme left or right in our political dialogue. In looking at where individuals stand ideologically, we have some terms to describe the issues and their relevance. A Valence issue is one that has a broad support across both ideological bases and is shared by conservatives and liberals alike, such as the desire for a good economy, national security, good education, and low unemployment. And even if the two parties differ in how these can be accomplished, Valence issues are the ones that are often shared by both ideologies. Wedge issues are ones that sharply divide the public, and we'll look at some examples in a minute, as these tend to get a lot of attention. Finally, saliency is the importance an issue has to a specific demographic, such as Social Security to the elderly and the rising costs of education for the young. So for our next skill, you will need to identify and describe how these ideological differences impact policies created by the government. Now again, I think you political scholars probably already know most of these, but if not, you might want to hit pause and copy down the chart about where the parties and ideologies tend to stand on the issues. And by the way, the wedge issues are highlighted. On the contentious issue of abortion, the Republicans tend to be pro-life, while Democrats are pro-choice. Affirmative action, which we already talked about in a previous lesson on civil rights, Democrats tend to support affirmative action policies, while Republicans go against. Gun control, the Democrats favor more restrictions, while Republicans tend to favor less. Healthcare, Democrats have taken the lead on increasing access. Another wedge issue, immigration. Democrats tend to favor a path for citizenship for undocumented immigrants, especially the so-called dreamers. And finally, we could go on and on regarding differences on issues, but liberals have been pushing for an increased minimum wage, while the Republicans tend to want to eliminate or even lower it. So let's start out by looking at the economic differences between the two ideologies as they stand today. And two vocabulary terms you will need to know and be able to describe are fiscal policies and monetary. And you can tell by their names, both involve money. For fiscal, we will focus on Congress and the president and their influence on the economy, which comes from their power to tax and where they spend money. And while we often refer to Congress as having the quote-unquote power of the purse, in both areas, the president certainly plays a big role. For monetary, we're going to be talking about the Federal Reserve, a part of our bureaucratic agencies, and their ability to control money in circulation, which we will come back to. Now, constitutionally, the power to tax was given to Congress, you remember this, as the first enumerated power in Article 1, Section 8. And many years later, they created the bureaucratic agency, the beloved IRS, to help implement this policy. We've already gone over the budget process where the president, with the help of the OMB, drafts the budget, but it's really Congress that takes the lead in refining the budget and sending it off to the president for their signature. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the changing nature of liberalism when it comes to their role in the economy. Classical liberals believed in a laissez-faire policy, one in which they wanted the government to keep their hands out of the economy. But starting with the Progressive era, and especially FDR's response to the Great Depression, that's always our turning point, liberals and the Democratic Party have taken a much larger role in regulating the economy, including programs to help the economically disadvantaged. FDR's policies coincided with the economic ideologies of economist John Maynard Keynes and what's called Keynesian economics. The theory is that during economic recessions, the government must increase their spending to make up for a lack of consumer spending, with the goal of stimulating the economy. In contrast, as we mentioned, the current Republican and fiscal conservative wing believe in much less governmental interference, not just in the economy, but also in social policy. The flip side of Keynesian economics is the Republican ideology of supply-side economics. The goal is also to stimulate the economy, but in this case through lower taxes on the wealthy and corporations, with the theory that this will create more jobs and spending. Supply-side economics is often associated with what is known as trickle-down economics and sometimes Reaganomics. So how could Congress and the president put these practices into policies? And remember, that's always what you want to be thinking about for your FRQs and your AP. Congress can provide tax incentives for policies that they would like to see implemented, such as write-offs for green energy initiatives. Definitely a liberal or democratic initiative. While presidents are not technically in charge of changing policies, that's Congress, they can be very influential in getting Congress to act, as we saw with President Trump's tax cuts on corporations and individual tax rates. To summarize, remember, the key goal of a fiscal conservative is to decrease regulations on business, while Democrats often increase regulations, usually to protect either workers or the environment. So one of our last things at looking at and implementing policy is monetary policies. And again, we mentioned the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has a wide variety of tools to fight inflation and recessions. And they do this by setting interest rates, controlling the amount of currency in circulation, which is usually accomplished by their buying or selling treasury bonds, as well as setting reserve rates for how much banks must keep on hand, impacting the percentage of money a bank can lend. The Federal Reserve is headed by a board of governors, and even though they are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, the Fed is designed to be semi-politically insulated, as their terms are staggered over several presidential administrations. There's also a precedent that the branches of the federal government are expected to defer to their economic expertise. Although there have been some examples of presidents and Congress putting pressure on the Fed to implement measures to address economic concerns. But that is our brief overview of the Federal Reserve. So finally, let's look at social policies and how social liberals and social conservatives differ on the issues and the policies that they would like the government to address. Liberals tend to advocate for a quote-unquote level playing field and for the most part support social welfare programs to limit wealth discrepancies, while conservatives believe in quote-unquote equality of opportunity, one of those core values we talked about in a previous video, and they are more about self-reliance as opposed to what many refer to as quote-unquote government handouts. I'm doing a lot of quote-unquotes. So when we talked about the budget, we referred to entitlement programs, which fall under the mandatory spending category. And these include Social Security and Medicare, which have far more bipartisan and ideological support, as these programs are supported through employee paychecks. We won't get into the solvency issues that we've discussed. However, liberals are more likely to support other mandatory spending programs such as food stamp programs and temporary welfare programs. So this was a quick overview, and we'll be diving deeper into this by looking at some of these issues more in depth in class, and I hope you will too. But for those of you who follow the news, it seems like we've reached a new heights of this ideological differences and partisan bickering, but this is not the first time we've been here, and it certainly won't be the last. Let's hope the tone of our political rhetoric becomes more civilized, and we can celebrate the more that we have in common than the differences that divide us. And this is a good place to pick up next time. But before we do, let's review. Which political party is identified as liberal? Too easy. The Democrats. Which political party wants extremely limited governmental interference into people's lives? I said extremely limited. The Libertarians. These are issues that can sharply divide the public. Wedge issues. Which party is more likely to be anti-gun control legislation? I don't mean anti-gun, just the control part. That would be the Republicans. Which party would most likely propose increasing taxes on the wealthy and corporations? The Democrats. What do we call the government's ability to impact the economy through taxing and spending? That's fiscal policy. What do we call government's ability to impact the economy through the money supply? Monetary policy. Which economic theory proposes increased government spending during downward economic cycles or recessions? Keynesian economics. What economic theory proposes decreased taxes and business regulations to stimulate the economy? Supply-side economics, also known as trickle-down or Reaganomics. What tools do Congress and the president have to influence the economy? Taxes and budget spending. This government body oversees monetary policy for the United States, the Federal Reserve. What tools does the Federal Reserve have to fight inflation and recessions? Well, they set interest rates, they control the amount of money in circulation. What do we call mandatory services such as Social Security and Medicare? Entitlement programs. Which ideology and party would most likely favor increased social welfare programs? Liberals and the Democrats. And that is it, my friends. I want to thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe. And just a reminder, teachers, that this PowerPoint with a wide variety of materials is available at Teachers Pay Teachers. Click on the link below this video or go to Mr. Raymond's Social Studies Academy at Teachers Pay Teachers. And again, guys, thanks for watching. Keep it up. You're going to crush that AP.